Succession. Succession is when you start with, for example, bare sand or bare rock and you have a pioneer species. That pioneer species is a hardy species. It's slow growing, but it's able to grow in the most harshest conditions. So it might have features that allow it to adapt to very dry conditions, very poor nutrient availability, and it's typically not going to rely on insects for pollination. So maybe it will rely on wind for pollination because they're just not going to be there in that environment which is truly very harsh, like on a beach, like on a lava field, which is just cooled volcanic rock. Once you've got your pioneer species, they will grow and then they will die. And as they die, they build up the soil and therefore moisture content. So then you end up with increased number of nutrients, minerals. They may even alter the pH slightly as well. And it's all those abiotic factors that then help the next species to succeed. So the next species will succeed and outcompete the pioneer species. So the previous organism improve the habitat and make conditions, make the environment less harsh. And that then allows the next species to succeed and outcompete. So the next organism, next species, outcompetes the first species. And you can see that in a table if you had organism A, B, C and D, and you found that A was abundant, so we had occupying 75%, and B was 0, C was 0, D was 0, and then you had this one falling to say 10%, but then suddenly A got up to 60%, and B was 10%, and D was nothing, and then this went to 0%, C went to 20%, and then B suddenly shot up to 80%, and D was 0 again. And you could then work out that what is the order of succession. Well, if the final one is 0, 0, 30 and 70, you know that it went A was followed by C, which was followed by B, which was followed by D. And that's because of the changes in the percentages. So over time you would expect this one to be the most abundant, then the numbers decrease, this one becomes more abundant, and that's because this one is improving the conditions such that this one is able to grow, outcompete the previous one, then those ones get broken down, so saprobionts break down, release nutrients, release minerals, more moisture can be held, retained within the soil, so then you get another species that's more successful there, can grow faster, that then starts to provide shade, and eventually you end up with your climax community at the end. And you can see that in animal species and in plant species, and that's primary succession. Now, if you then went along and you destroyed that climax community with a forest fire, or something along those lines, or a flood, or whatever it was, you might not necessarily go back to that original pioneer species, and that's because you've now got soil. So that would be secondary succession. So you might go back to an earlier species, like B for example, and then succession might repeat itself. If you want to stop at B, then we call that a plagioclimax community, and effectively what's happening in, for example, the Lake District, it should be all woodland and forest, but it isn't because of the sheep grazing, and as they graze they prevent the succession, so they prevent the development of bushes and trees, and so therefore we keep the grassland as it is. So you're maintaining a particular species because of the way that you're grazing or treating that land. So that is succession.